Friends, yeah. Today is Monday, October 20th, and it's about 7 p.m. In the evening in Delhi. If you hear some noise in the background, these are the firecrackers that are being set off because today, of course, is Diwali. I am going to speak today about a different kind of illumination than the one offered by the uh, firecrackers, and that is the very interesting, I shouldn't say necessarily welcome news, but very interesting news that I woke up to this morning when I read in the newspapers that the French crown jewels had been stolen from the Louvre. And it was quite amusing to read about all of that because, this kind of heist, which took approximately 7 minutes, it seems, is the stuff of literally hundreds of films. One of the genres of films that I really like is a film noir, and there are a number of these film noirs and crime films from the 1940s to the 1960s, even some French ones actually from the 40s and 50s, where a professional jewel thief or someone who is an expert in opening safes has just come out of prison and they've decided that they're not, going to indulge in these activities anymore. They're going to reform themselves, but then they get this offer, and this offer from some old friend, some crony of theirs, is that, why don't you help us with this one last heist? And, you'll make enough money that you can go into retirement. And then grudgingly, this person agrees to do that. And then, of course, they get caught. Um, but apart from all of these films, there are also films such as films that I used to enjoy watching with my daughter when she was 6, 7 years old, and sometimes once in a while, even in the last few years, we have just for the sake of laughs gone back to these films, and we're referring, of course, to the Pink Panther series, right? The first of the Pink Panther films was made in 1963. There's a film called The Return of the Pink Panther, which is 1975, which actually opens with this long, elaborate scene of the Phantom. So the Phantom is this jewel thief, that's what he's called, who steals a precious, priceless jewel, and then Inspector Clouseau, played by Peter Sellers, which is one of the things that made, of course, this whole series memorable, was Inspector Clouseau, this bumbling old fool, but lovable. He is set to he is the one who's going to be assigned, the task of tracking down this phantom, right? So I was very much thinking about this, and it seems that these thieves were bumbling in their own way, and not yet quite, because they did manage to steal the jewels, get away in 7 minutes, and they were and they fled on scooters, two scooters, right? But they dropped on their way before they could get on their scooters. They dropped the crown that belonged to Napoleon III's wife, the Empress Eugenia, and that crown was obviously worth, millions of dollars or euros as well. So all of this came to mind when I was reading about this heist that took place in daylight, 9:30 a.m. Yesterday, and apparently what the thieves did was they actually used a basket lift uh, and a extendable ladder, which they raised to the second floor balcony window. They broke a number of windows, and then just simply carted away these jewels and fled. I mean, how amazing, right? And of course, the reaction in France, especially, has been that this is a matter of national humiliation. The right-wing French politicians who have always been looking for various kinds of excuses to attack Macron. I mean, there are plenty of reasons to critique him, no doubt, but they're describing this as a national humiliation, a wound to the French soul, right? This is what the leader of the Front National says. The National Rally leader, Jordan Bordella, says it is an, quote, intolerable humiliation. And Macron himself described the theft as an attack on our own history. I might say, by the way, that the Louvre has a history, itself has a history of thefts. Um, Not many people are aware that the Mona Lisa was in fact stolen from the Louvre in 1911 by a Italian employee who apparently thought that this painting really belonged in Italy. But anyhow, he kept it in his own possession for 2 years before it was recovered in 1913. So the question, of course, that is before everyone. It's not the question that interests me, as you'll find out, because I wouldn't be doing this talk if I were giving you a very conventional history or a very conventional narrative, which you can read in the newspapers about what the theft of these jewels means. But the question before everyone, needless to say, is how was this even possible? I mean, isn't a museum like the Louvre, right? Or let's say the British Museum or the Metropolitan Museum in New York. I mean, aren't these museums that have hundreds and thousands of CCTV cameras and generally museums like these have only one main entrance and you come in through that and you leave through that and that entrance is secured and there are guards. This is a fortification. I mean, these museums have art which the monetary value of it is nearly inestimable. It's going to run into billions of dollars when you look at any major museum in the West, such as the Louvre, as I said, the British Museum, or in Russia, the Hermitage, Metropolitan Museum, or museums in cities such as Tokyo. If you look at the National Museum in Tokyo, right? Um, so those are the questions that come to the mind of everyone. But I want to offer a very different kind of reading because, as I said, I'm not disturbed at all by what has happened. I'm not alarmed. I'm amused. And I'm also thinking about something called the revenge of history, right? To use that phrase that is really often used. Now, let's begin first with this expression, the French crown jewels, right? Which is the expression we're hearing that they were stolen, right? Who ever heard of the French crown jewels? I mean, before this happened, how many people had really heard of the French crown jewels, right? I mean, you know that they're there probably, but how many really have heard of them? Everybody's heard of the British, right? Crown jewels, and we know that they're in the Tower, and perhaps other places as well. We know the Kohinoor became a part of that. The Kohinoor is probably one of the world's most famous diamond, or certainly one of the, handful of most famous diamonds ever. But who ever heard of the French crown jewels before this? But even if you had, let's just go over that history for a minute or two. That will really suffice. Because the first thing that needs to be understood is that the French crown jewels, whatever they are today, they are really a fraction of what they were in the last 200 years. What you have today is something that goes back to the 19th century, right? But the French crown jewels have been there for a much longer period of time, and portions of the collection have from time to time been stolen. Part of the reason for that is that the royalist party in French politics has always attached importance to things like the crown jewels. And the reason for that is quite obvious. The reason they attach importance to it is because, of course, Where there is a king, a queen, a monarch, you will need crown jewels. So the crown jewels have an intricate relationship with monarchy. And of course, the whole idea of the French Revolution was to take down the monarchy. But we know that ever since the monarchy was taken down, and certainly throughout the 19th century, throughout the 1800s, there were attempts at the restoration of the monarchy, right? So there was, for example, a royalist coup in 1877. And when these coups are thwarted, one of the things that is done is that these a portion of the crown jewels are sold off, partly as a sign to the royalists that, well, your days are really over. But this collection that we have today, from which 8 pieces have been stolen, this collection has diminished enormously in size because over the last 200, 250, 300 years, uh, portions of this were always sold off to pay off the national debt or to finance a war. That's what kings did. That's what monarchs did. That's what modern states do, right? You conduct wars, and then how do you finance these wars? So sometimes they were financed by actually selling off a portion of these jewels, right? And one of the largest, one of one of the famous jewelers in the world that has been responsible for selling off many of these. They were given this mandate, as it were, is Tiffany's. Some of these went to collectors and to museums in the United States, and in fact, now an attempt is being made to recover some of these. When I say now, I don't mean today after the heist. I mean that in contemporary times, there's an attempt to sort of bring back some of these crown jewels. All right, now that's so. Therefore, there is a very interesting history. The second thing is, let's not forget that everybody's worried about the theft of these crown jewels or wondering about how it happened. Well, I think we should acknowledge the fact that a large part of the collections of the museums of countries in Europe, particularly countries such as Britain and France and Holland, which are all imperial powers, and Belgium, right? That large portions of these collections are, in fact, actually the stolen wealth of countries from other parts of the world, from Asia and Africa, right? Uh, there's all this excitement about the theft of these crown jewels, but frankly, these countries and their museums exist because that is the wealth of these countries exists because of the fact that they have acquired enormous booty, stolen wealth from countries in Asia and Africa. I think we should be much more alarmed about that than we are about the theft of the crown jewels, right? And then this leads me now to my third and final consideration, and I'm quite certain that this reading will seem very eccentric, even to some people who are really familiar with my train of thought. And I'm quite certain also that what I'm going to argue here is not something that you're going to read in any commentary on the theft of the crown jewels. Right? And what is it that I want to argue? What is this institution called the museum? Okay. Now I want to suggest that we think of it in this way. I'm keeping this very short because this can be the subject for a much, much longer uh, uh, discussion. Right? Um, so this talk can extend for a much longer period of time. And in fact, uh, what I'm going to argue here, apropos of the museum, is something that must be seen in the wider context of what was the most characteristic contribution, if we may use that word, from the late 18th century and the 19th century. Think of the major institutions, the major forms of social organization of knowledge that have come down to us with modernity. There is the nation state, right? The nation state is the bounded political community, which is the bedrock of the nation state system or the international system of states that we have. Of course, its origins go back to what's called the Westphalian Treaty in the second half of the 17th century. But most nation states really only began to emerge, okay, in the 19th century, and in the case of Africa, in the 20th century, right, as late as the 1960s. But what is a nation state? It's a bounded space, right? And it's controlled by things such as passports. The entry and exit is controlled by passports. So you enter a nation state, you need a passport. You can't enter it from anywhere. Of course, we know that people attempt to infiltrate that, right? Because borders can never be 100% secure. I I trust that some of the listeners will now begin to see where I'm going with this, but it's going to become amply clear in just a couple of minutes. So, one of the most characteristic institutions, forms of social organization, political organization, is a nation state. In the 19th century, you also have late 19th century and moving into the 20th century, the concentration camp, right? A bounded space. You get confined in that. And of course, if the concentration camps turns into a death camp, then you die there in that camp, right? But notice again, it's a space that's controlled, guarded, patrolled, barbed wire on the top, guards all around, watchtowers, right? The prison. The prison has been there before, but the rate, the pace with which the prison, okay, becomes explosive, becomes a part of the apparatus of the nation state, the manner in which the prison is used to discipline people, to install a regime of surveillance. And again, you enter the prison and you leave the prison, if you leave the prison, only at the will of someone else. Okay? The prison, the concentration camp, the asylum, none of these have multiple entries. Just as the nation state, we don't want to take it technically. Of course, a nation state has multiple entries. You can enter India, by taking a flight to Delhi or to Chennai or Bangalore or Hyderabad, or you can enter the United Kingdom by taking a flight to London or Liverpool, right? And similarly with any other country, there are probably 200 international airports in the United States. Right? But the point when I say it's singular, the entry that when you can only enter at the pleasure of someone else if you're entering legally, right? And your entry is regulated. It's a bounded space. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why quote illegal immigrants provoke a kind of an anxiety, because these people are able to transgress that bounded space. Have you ever thought about how many films there are about prison escapes? Right? One of the most famous such films was made by the great French filmmaker Bresson. Right? The entire film is simply about the attempt of a man to escape from prison. But there are literally, again, hundreds of films, some of them very well known, about the escape from the prison. Because it's this bounded space from which you want to escape. Now, I'm simply suggesting that this heist that has taken place from the Louvre, we should take a very different lesson from it than what everyone in the state will tell you is the lesson that we need to take it from it. What is the lesson that the French state is going to take from it, and that every other custodian and guardian of a major museum elsewhere in the world will take from it? They'll say, we need to do more to secure the museum. Okay? And I want to suggest that the lesson that people who value freedom people who value the advantages of unbounded spaces, people who revel in ambiguity and who understand how modern civilization has taken us from fuzzy spaces to bounded spaces, right? People who understand all of that will take a very different lesson, or ought to take a very different lesson from what has happened with the heist at the Louvre. And that lesson is simply this, that we have to now similarly find ways in which we can breach the nation state. The nation state is, as a political entity, is the greatest danger to humankind. It is the most exploitive, the most oppressive, the most homogenizing, the most narrow conception of political community that we know of. The prison is again a space that we need to be able to breach, by which I mean that there should be rigorous critiques of the incarceral state. And these critiques cannot simply be sociological and based on notions of identity. That's important, i.e., that disproportionate number of prisoners in America happen to be black, or a disproportionate number of people in another country happen to be a religious or linguistic minority, or people who are, in a country which doesn't tolerate, let's say, gay people, that a disproportionate number of people happen to be gay. All of that is important. That's a sociological understanding of the incarceral state. I'm speaking about a philosophical understanding of the incarceral state and why we need to breach it. What this heist suggests is that supposedly the most impregnable secure institution can be breached. And we need to be able to take some comfort from that, right? And as I said, this is a theme on which I can elaborate, but I wanted to give a rather heretical reading of the heist that took place at the Louvre yesterday. Thank you.